We're live with our 282nd episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on social media, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on social media. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. Excited to be here as usual to talk all things security, but there are a couple of items that we wanted to talk about first, just running through our general list of where we're going to be, what's coming up. First things first, we do have another opportunity for practical secure code review that we will be doing virtually May 12th and 11th. Nope, 12th and 13th. Wow, I'm going backwards. That's how my day's going. 12th and 13th, but would love to see everyone there, right? Like the last one was very successful and are looking to just, keep the love going with the practical secure code review course. The added value of things like AI, LLMs, maybe even MCP, depending on how much time we have before the course itself, but some introduction there on how to actually utilize AI agents and analyze code bases. Would love to have you. So there's that opportunity. In addition, there is the opportunity at DEF CON for harnessing LLMs for application security, right? Which covers more than just code reviews, but actually digs into dynamic and a bunch of other things on top of static analysis using LLMs. So check that out. If you are interested, we'll be doing that at DEF CON trainings. That is the couple of days after DEF CON. Just be aware that you will end up staying in Vegas for a couple more days if you are attending DEF CON as it is. Outside of that, I did want to give a shout out to Redpoint today for being our sponsor. Redpoint Security specializes in code security by coders, which is bolstered by years of experience testing applications and conducting code reviews against all types of apps. Redpoint also offers secure code training to help ground your team in better application security practices across the development lifecycle. So check out redpointsecurity.com for more information and put your company on a path to better security. Thanks to Redpoint for sponsoring. Cool. On top, besides that, Ken and I in a couple of weeks will be at B-Side San Francisco. We'll be having a State of Absolute AppSec panel with a couple of different guests, including people that have been on the podcast and one that has not. So Ariel Shin will be there. And then we've got, I'm trying to remember, is it Lakshmi from Netflix?
Yep.
Should be an interesting panel to dig into. I obviously will be talking AI and application security and where things are going. I'm excited to talk with Lakshmi about, or ask her questions about Netflix and what they're doing recently, right? Just given the background with Netflix, the paved path, everything that Netflix did a few years ago and was very cutting edge from a maturity perspective in the application security space. It'll be interesting to get her take and what they're actually concentrating on, because they've always been fairly innovative. Ariel will be as well. We'll have other questions, but if you have questions that you would like any of us to answer during that panel, because it will be on YouTube as well afterwards, B-Side San Francisco live streams the whole event. Please get your questions in. There is a form that you can fill out if you want to push a question, or you can check out the newsletter. Let's see, I'm going to pull that link really quick so we've actually got it up and available. There we go.
Yeah, I was just trying to find it too. Nice.
Whoops. Yeah, the best spot is actually, like, if you check the newsletter down at the end, it has it linked there, right? But I'm going to post it across. It's just a Google form. Submit a question for us. We'll add it to the list. We will curate those questions and attempt to make sure that it fits the overall theme. But even outlandish ones, I'm sure we will add to the list, just because it makes for good discussion. Sweet. Otherwise, I did want to give a shout out as well to the B-Side Salt Lake City crew, Bryce and team. I guess I'm not sure if Bryce is leading it up now, but Redpoint sponsored B-Side Salt Lake City, and I actually spoke at the event. This was last week, and it's grown significantly since 4 or 5 years ago. What I remember, especially pre-pandemic wise, and what we ran previously, I think there was probably 500-600 attendees this year. There was a lot of students, which was good to see, but also just like the community itself has grown over time, right? And in Salt Lake City, or like the Salt Lake City metro area, we've kind of got two security conferences. There's B-Side Salt Lake City, and then there's St. Con that happens in October. Typically, the reason I don't end up at LasCon is because St. Con is the same week. But the shout out that I wanted to give was just the nature of the conference. Like, it's the community building has happened, but there is definitely more of an AppSec focus at B-Sides than I've noticed in the past, specifically around things like, red teaming applications in general. Like some of the vendors that were there, like there was socket.dev, there were other application security specific people. It goes to AppSec in general and how it's grown over the last few years. But yeah, like it felt more inclusive that way than it has in the past. Like, one of my big complaints, especially in the Valley here, originally with the security conferences, is just how much they kind of ignored application security. It was all network security, pen testing, right? Like, network pen, red teaming, right? A lot of that. But we've seemed to have grown up as an industry, at least locally, which is good to see, right? I spoke on user enumeration. I think we talked about that last week, the week before. I'm trying to remember if we actually did. Yeah. It was a couple
I was going
weeks
to
ago.
ask, like,
right?
I was going to ask, like, how long was your talk? What was your talk? I mean, I know we talked a little bit about it, but yeah, what was it? What was the content? Username enumeration, a little bit about it.
Yeah. I mean, I showed a couple weeks ago, like identifying, enumeration with LLMs just based on a user request, right? Like, or an HTTP request. Like I started to take that even further from a code perspective, and I'm going to push some stuff out to my GitHub repository related to the talk. I just haven't gotten around to it yet, given the weekend and everything else that has happened. But initially, it was just analyzing, request responses for possible enumeration locations, right? Whether that is like parameters that are being pushed across, maybe URL parameters, path parameters, like whatever it happens to be. It does a fairly good job of that, especially with reflection. And then on top of that, I actually started to pull like data for enumeration attacks. That was the other interesting thing that was fairly useful. So instead of having to write like a full-blown regular expression for email addresses or usernames or anything like that, all I did was flipped the reflection LLM to analyzing a full request and response for all of the interactions with an application, and have it start to dump out possible usernames and user identifiers, right? And it's rather fascinating to watch. Once you are able to interact with an LLM, you don't have to be quite so prescriptive, and you don't have to build as many regular expressions. And I know you know this, Ken, because this is what you're dealing with as well. But it becomes more of this, and shout out to you guys in your natural language code policies that you're releasing as well. But I'm seeing that same ability on the dynamic side anytime that I have any sort of database of information from an LLM perspective. So a database of a user session with an application, I can just ask the LLM to go through that and comb for very specific data, and don't have to be overly prescriptive about it, right? Like, I can give it a couple of examples, but I can say, hey, pull out usernames and emails and possible user identifiers. And it'll come back with a very succinct list and identify places in the application that I didn't even think to look, in order to actually build out this attack content to attack user enumeration endpoints, right? Yeah. So, I mean, the talk in general, like, we went over what enumeration is, why it can be a threat when people don't necessarily consider it to be a threat. And then we used LLMs to actually refine both the threat analysis and the attack possibilities. I didn't quite go to the level of attacking the endpoints yet, or exploiting user enumeration. That's kind of the next step, and that'll be the next evolution that we do with the tool and with the talk. So
Did
interesting
you
stuff.
get many good questions afterwards? Like any good interactions, questions?
Yeah, I like the biggest thing. Most people were more interested. I mean, enumeration, obviously, like it's a Crocs and socks, right? Like dad topic, definitely, right? I seem to focus on those because no one else wants to, right? Like, or whatever makes me excited, I guess. Um, but most of the questions were around like LLM usage, right? And how to actually manipulate that. I'm still surprised at the number of people that haven't necessarily written prompts or haven't tried to interact with LLMs outside of a chat prompt, right?
Yeah.
Even in our space or in the security space in general. Like they'll go in and ask it like, oh, here's a YAML file. Tell me things about it, but they're still turning to chat GPT. Some people may be Anthropic, right? But there still is kind of this lack of like practitioner engineering level of interaction that just hasn't happened yet.
Mm.
So like the most of my questions were around that, right? Like I'm using Anthropic, like or Claude Haiku 3.5 to do the analysis. They're asking, well, how much did that cost, right? Like, analyzing 40 sessions. And I'm like, man, cost way less than my time would to do the same level of
Yeah.
analysis, right? And really when it's sense, like it's just,
Yeah. It's probably like a
so,
quarter.
yeah.
It's
If
like,
if
yeah, it's
that, right?
worth
Like, yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even
Yep.
if if even that, true.
You know.
Well,
So yeah, it was good. I mean, I may like dig into that a little bit more and we may show some of that stuff as soon as I've got like the full pipeline there working from a dynamic perspective. I don't know. And that kind of leads us to our first topic around MCP stuff, right? I posted one article, but it's all the rage. I mean, I know even Burp Suite right now, or Portswigger was running a live session on. They've built an MCP server as an extension for Burp, so that you can interact with Burp using MCP. I haven't necessarily played with that yet, but the article that I just posted was, about the S in MCP stands for security. Before we dive into the article specifically, um, what what are your I know we talked a little bit about agents. I think it was last week or the week before.
yeah.
But what are your thoughts on this, like this kind of like MCP wave that we're seeing over the last month? As someone that's actually using LLMs on a daily basis, you have built agents in the past, you have it interacting with tools as it is. Like, what are your feelings on MCP, like model context protocol in general?
Yeah, it's definitely a good thing. I mean, the learning curve getting started 2 years ago in this world was insane. So it streamlines the ability for tools to like plug into each other,
Hmm.
and communicate. So that's great. It's a standard protocol. I don't have like, I guess the overall positive. Just I mean, obviously we're going to talk about the security aspects of that, and so then outside of that, generally positive. Then you get to the security bits of it, and it's a little concerning. But yeah, MCP itself though is just a protocol for, or essentially a protocol for tools to integrate. And then there's also a new one too called for agents to talk to each other. I don't know if you heard about this one, agent to agent, that Google released. I just put the link in there. Um, but this is a way to standardize agent to agent communication. So, yeah, generally speaking, with MCP, it looks very familiar to things that I've already done, but in a standard way that doesn't require a hodgepodge of different libraries to accomplish your
Hmm.
goal. So yeah, it was all very bespoke and unique and ad hoc, and now we're seeing some streamlined ways of enriching your queries to LLMs. So that's net positive, I would think. And then, like I said, this agent to agent streamlining. I think that's what it's really comes down to. Is we're just in a world right now where like these are a thing. They're they're going to be part of your infrastructure, just like a database, just like whatever else, right? So they're going to be around. We might as well find standard ways of interoperability, if I can say that word right, interoperability between them. So what are your thoughts here on MCP, A2A?
Yeah, I'm all for it, right? Like anything that makes it easier. It does feel like the migration that happened on, databases or web services in the back, the fact that we use things like REST or use things like GraphQL, right, to interact with, data stores or to run specific actions. It's an extension of that to expose that same sort of functionality to AIs and let AIs actually do the analysis and do the determine whether or not they actually need to use those tools. In the course in harnessing LLMs, we talk about actually building, some of the tools and, creating an interface for agentic tools to be used. That's one thing that, I'm sure is going to be adjusted as we move forward with the rise of MCP, with the rise of A2A. Like we'll probably start to use that instead because that's the direction that we're going. But on the flip side, it is useful to be able to understand how to build those out so that you can create something that is MCP compliant, I guess. Yeah. And the one thing is, right, like, so that article that I posted, the fact that security is not really built into MCP currently may be an issue, right? Well, I'm going to make that even stronger. The fact that security is not built into it is going to be an issue, right? So what happens when your LLM starts to interact with a tool that takes advantage of the LLM interactions or it changes itself over time, right? Like this article from Elena Cross goes through some of the issues that we're already seeing, right? That it's not secure by default. Maybe let me show this really quick.
Yeah, I was going to say you might want to share the article.
Yep. All right. Yep. Okay, so this is the article. It's fairly short, but it does raise some good points, right? It's been described as USB-C for AI agents. That's kind of what we were talking about. Runs commands, shares context, but it's not secure by default, right? Like you've opened a side channel attack into your application through your AI or through your LLM, through your agents, and how they interact with that tool, with that MCP server may not necessarily be secure, and it could expose you to data leakage and other possible things, right? So first things first is command injection vulnerabilities, right? Depending on how you're actually exposing these tools as well, right? Some of them are command injection as a service, right? Like that simplified os.system call, we know that that's an issue, right? Yeah. And it's being executed via a trusted agent. It's almost like we could turn the agents on the MCP itself and actually have it do these sorts of attacks. But tool poisoning, the ability to actually rug pull, redefine what the tool actually does and change it over time. So that's a supply chain problem, obviously, right? But it's basically, it's not secure. We haven't thought through all the possibilities, all the threats that are actually there, and that can come about when we're calling untrusted tools. And this goes back to that signature stuff that we were doing, or that we talked about last week, Ken, that Google released their SIG store, LLM signatures. At this point, we probably need signatures for tools as well and for MCP functions to make sure that you are calling the one that you thought you were calling initially, that you defined within your application. There's just there's not a standard around that right now, right? There's no authentication standard for it like they call out here. And yeah, it's going to be an issue. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
What have you done to actually secure that pipeline? I mean, outside of you've built your own tooling.
Yeah, we didn't use MCP. obviously that's a newer thing, so we're not. And just to be clear with that too, if I wanted to, for instance, like have somebody's IDE integrate with our product, like that's where I would use MCP. And I think
Mhm.
also that I need to like dial back because there's some terms thrown in here that are like, so it's like, oh, it's a way to connect AI agents. Like maybe that's that's partly true, right? But it's also a way to interact just with the LLM and enrich your queries to the LLM. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, like in some of these cases, I wonder if the LLM is being given agentic tool access to do command line operations. You know what I mean? Like some LLMs do. They are given the ability to specifically either write commands, or the idea being that they can run commands or even write into a code interpreter
Mhm.
shell, and test out whether or not the code, it's like there's a REPL binding for a lot of libraries that you use for interacting with LLMs. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like, while this is enabling queries to enrich and standardize the way that we uh, have meaningful outcomes with LLM ecosystem, I guess, I feel like this is traditional. This is a like very traditional set of vulnerabilities, just with a different technology in the mix, LLM specifically.
Mhm.
Like, but giving the LLM agentic like access, meaning like giving it tools that it can use to do certain operations, if those tools are command line terminal, you know, command. Sorry, I'm a little brain dead today, but if yeah, if it's terminal access, if you can write system commands, if the LLM can, and then you're able to direct and influence the LLM how it operates, like that's scary. I don't know if that's MCP's fault, is my point. I think it might be just the way it was architected. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Like, again,
It'd be like me blaming
it's a trust
HTTPS for
boundary.
someone's,
Yeah.
authorization issues in their web app. Like I can't blame the protocol. I have to blame the developer.
Yeah. Yeah. Just be careful about what you're actually exposing as a tool, right? I mean, that simplified example that I've got up on the screen right now, where like it's a notify function that just calls an OS system like command line tool using string concatenation. Yeah, that's gonna be an issue, right? Like, but that's the simple example of it, right? Like if you expose that to an LLM through a chatbot or something like that, there are ways to actually have the LLM or the chatbot interact with the tool and probably, most likely send the user context within that window or within that instruction to the tool. So it, it's all those trust layers. Like, we should be doing input validation, right? No matter what the source is, whether it's the users themselves that could be attacker, but also the LLM, right? Like, trust but verify, is a standard security control, and it's going to be the same thing when it comes to MCP, but the tools that are running on an MCP.
Yeah, absolutely. So
I,
it's like not MCP that's the problem, right? It's the underlying implementation, and this is actually like philosophically been one of the more difficult things to deal with when it comes to security conversations around LLMs, is that there are people that have done like really great research and really dug in and understand how they work and understand um, how they don't work also, and that it's not magic, and here's how you plug all these different parts into um, a centralized sort of LLM, right? And maybe a set of LLMs, but all the tooling around it is still traditional infrastructure to a degree, right? I mean, guess vector DBs are, I think, newer. But anyways, yeah, I guess I'm just saying that I get a little frustrated when I see people who haven't done their research weigh in, and not to, this has nothing to do with this article. I'm just generally speaking about things like MCP, A2A, LLMs, vector DBs, agentic, all the terms, right? It's like I see a lot of stuff, and I was talking to somebody, I won't put their name out, who's trying to build security tooling using LLMs in their organization, and finding a bit of pushback. And they're like, I don't. It's there's just a lack of knowledge around it, so there's like fear. Um, and yeah, I don't know, it's pretty problematic right now. There's
Yeah.
not enough, there's kind of a knee-jerk reaction without enough investigation and self-discovery,
Hmm.
or not
Yeah.
self-discovery, just discovering. Yeah, that I need more coffee, Seth. It was
No.
a late. Yeah. But yeah, I think you get where I'm going, is
Yeah,
there's
I do.
unnecessary fear at times without enough like research done. uh,
Yeah, I
so
mean, the knee-jerk reaction is like, no, no, we don't want to actually use any of that. But I think we've jumped over that hump. I mean, I do appreciate that Google has come out with the A2A stuff, right? Like looking at it, just like they're thinking through, okay, how do you do agent-to-agent authentication? Um, how do you think about this so that you're securing those anything that's running on MCP, any of those tools, to make sure that it is what you expect it to be? There's some sort of integrity. They are thinking about kind of the threats that are associated with it, right? And there is a draft spec that they are going to put out for discovery, for user experience, for actual like security. Um, yeah, part of me wants to actually dig into that, right? Because there's Google's GitHub instance, A2A protocol that's going to talk through all this. Yeah. Anyway, like I don't have enough knowledge of that quite yet, though, that we could speak to it. But it does look like they are addressing a lot of what's going on in this article by overlaying MCP with some well thought out and well architected, additional protocols to address these needs. Cool. All right. So outside of that, let me stop sharing that one screen. The other article that I wanted to talk to that does feed into this is one that came out recently from Ben Kim that I noticed. And I know we didn't necessarily talk through exactly what we were going to review today, but it fits rather well with MCP A2A. This idea of non-human identities and their security, and why that should be one of your top priorities, right? I don't know if you got an opportunity to read this, but this definitely goes back to my inclination to talk about Crocs and socks stuff and dad topics of security, of application security specifically, because we're talking about authentication, and right, like the chatter of A2A and MCP. But Ben goes on here, and let me show this one too. Ben goes on here to describe what a non-human identity is. And if you're a developer, you're very familiar with this, or you're an AppSec, right? Machine-to-machine authentication has been an issue for years. The way that we allow machines to call AIs. So again, like MCP is another thing on top of this, but it is another aspect of machine-to-machine authentication, machine-to-machine communication, and tooling that we've got to be aware of. But we've dealt with this for a long time, right? Like there's multiple ways that we authenticate machines, that we allow them to perform specific functions, and give them permission to go and do these things, right? Whether that's API keys, OAuth tokens, like these service accounts, machine IDs, right? Like he's got that list that he actually calls out. But he is taking a step back to call these non-human identities, right?
Mhm.
A machine is authenticating itself via some sort of a process, whether it's overall defined, or it's mostly just some sort of a API key that we actually hand to it. But it allows machine to do whatever task we want it to do. But the problem that we run into is just the sheer amount of what do I want to say, staticness to this sort of authentication. There is, it's very hard to do something like out of band authentication when it is a machine. It just is, right? Especially when we have workloads that are running constantly or in off hours for an administrator, that we can't necessarily have a person go in and authenticate for a machine um, at any given time. So we've got to come up with a way to actually solve 2FA, out of band authentication, MFA, whatever it is for machines, right? I'm kind of going off here, Ken, but like, what are your thoughts around non-human identities and authentication in general? Like, what have you seen? How do you feel about the security of that mechanism? And yeah, where do you think we should go?
Oh man,
Just gave it
I
all
don't
to
know
you.
if I know. I'm
You don't
like,
know
I
if you
don't
have enough
know if I,
coffee for that question.
yeah, I don't know. Well, let's go through what they call an NHI. So, for instance, API keys, OAuth tokens, service accounts, machine
Hmm.
IDs, digital certificates, secrets. These are all ways that you can authenticate yourself, provide identity without it being a human. So, like app to app, for instance, there's usually some I don't know, keys being exchanged to do service to service calls. So, like, what I can say is that there is a real need for tracking. So, like, I think the stateless thing is what you're sort of referring to. Is that
Yeah.
um, these are like, so for instance, if a query comes in, maybe some bit of information needs to be analyzed. When that comes in, yeah, like there being a session that you're tracing, inherently, like we had to build in session tracing. So just for an example, like that, we didn't get that for free.
Yeah.
Also, there's the excuse me. Then also there's the agentic tool access, right? So like there's certain things I need to give an LLM access to in order for it to get further information and answer the question or the query correctly. But then there becomes the question of tracing that session query that came into the LLM down through the agentic tool access, and then making sure that there are um, gates in between the communication. So, like if I have to make this concrete, let's say I have an LLM, I have a database, and I have a I have a tool that gives it database access, and I have a tool that gives it, we'll say, command line access. Um, if I have a query come in and hit the LLM and it needs to call into the DB, obviously I want end to end the entire session to be traced. And I also want all communication between components, including the LLM to database and LLM to terminal, to be authenticated. That's the most ideal secure way to do it. And I think that in just from what I've observed, there has been a hard enough time building libraries such as LangChain, which allow you to interact with this ecosystem. Been hard enough to get those libraries to just functionally work correctly.
Yeah.
Um, and this, this gets to my point, which is if you're using the library out of the box, it's probably hard to do any of this, right? Like you have to build on top of that. If you're like just building your own connectors to your own LLM ecosystem, um, you have that challenge of it not being there for free either. So you have to again build that on top. I guess what I'm saying is I don't think anyone's really to this point been super as concerned about like how to secure every step along the way, and also make it possible for incident responders to go and triage incidents. I think it's been more of a focus on, well, hell, how do we even get these to work? How do we become, there's obviously a lot of questions around funding for the companies that are around AI in some capacity. So when funding and money is there, you're incentivized in a different way than security, right? You're incentivized to build something that's easy to connect to, performant, um, works well. So that's where the energy is going to be placed, is on market share adoption and yeah, just making
Well,
things easier, go to market features, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah. I mean, I get that. but then I go back to like exactly what Ben Kim here is talking about. Is we have these concepts, we have these access paths for agents, for agent to agent access, the tooling, the MCP that's being released. We talk a good game about layered security, but most of these abilities, we don't have a good way to actually. Well, number one, we don't have a good way. Like authentication just isn't something that, like to your point, right? Like authentication is not necessarily built into these from the ground up yet. So A2A is pushing some of that. MCP, I'm sure that will provide some of this eventually. But the second that you turn on an MCP server, you're allowing access to functions, right? Like you've got to authenticate the agents that are calling in. If there is sensitive data, there's other places that you actually need to, access this. Like I think we're going to see a raft of breaches that come about because people enable MCP against sensitive data sources and don't realize that they're not authenticating LLMs properly, that they're not authenticating, they're allowing access into things that they maybe shouldn't be allowing it into. But Ben's point here is that, we've got to be more aware about it, right? The fact that we can't do MFA, it's off the table for a lot of these tools because, what is the most basic MFA that we always talk about? Like if I'm talking about brute force attacks, the first thing that we talk about is CAPTCHA, right? And CAPTCHA was developed to actually prevent bots and agents from being able to authenticate as a real person, right? So, okay, that's out the window, which means, okay, are we giving, I don't know, are they going to create an MCP server that actually allows access to tokens, right? Like generated tokens? I like, honestly, that may actually be a way to do something like this. With a LastPass or a 1Password, actually creating an MCP for agents specifically to pull token identities to prove themselves. I mean, that works, but there's a whole infrastructure that doesn't necessarily exist yet to actually do this sort of authentication. And, it goes on, right? Like further on, like untangling how machines actually talk to each other, classic connections. Yeah. Again, right? Like when it comes to MCP, when it comes to authentication, right? Like the reason that we're like that I'm digging into this is because we still have issues with people accessing data sources from 20 years ago and whether or not machine to machine authentication actually works well. You think about your traditional web application architecture, application server, web server, talking to a database server on a back end. And some of those pieces don't even have authentication between them, right? Like Nginx talking to an application server, we're just passing traffic straight through. Whereas, okay, the application server talking to the database server actually has some sort of a password that's hard coded in it to talk to the database server. Granted, with cloud environments, we're doing, we've got added layers of IAM roles and policies that are associated with that. But at some point, there is a layered security approach that's got to be put into place that when the application security or the application server is compromised, what can they get to, right? What can you actually do? Can you still actually interact with the database server, start dumping everything that's in it? How much is restricted within those MCP tools that the LLM has access to, right? Like I start running through all these various scenarios in my head of what's going to get exposed and where the attacks are going to come from. And again, like I know I'm like just like wandering through this and it's not very modeled out in my own head. But these are the gut reactions that I'm having when I start to think about MCP, when I start to think about machine-to-machine authentication. And then to your point, logging and monitoring becomes a whole other problem that it hasn't been solved yet. It sounds like you guys have solved it from your tracing perspective, but you manually had to go in and do that.
Yeah, and nobody's perfect too. I mean, we're also a startup, so yeah, we did that, and we have yeah, obviously as a software security company, we have better protections than most, but we're still like how do I say it? We're still experimenting ourselves with what we need to do and what we need to build in. We don't have like it's like anything, right? And it actually, I mean, zooming out of AI, just zooming in, however, on sort of new technologies that tend to hit us every so often in AppSec.
Hmm.
Um, it's just I wasn't very succinct, obviously, but what I'm really trying to say is that this is just so early, and anytime we deal with a technology and during the early nascent stages, it's never it's rarely secure, I should say, rarely secure. Rarely have these things been thought about. We're going to witness all the same, like we already are witnessing all the same type of stuff between supply chains, new protocols coming out that need to be secured, companies coming out to protect, do cybersecurity, this, that, and the other with AI. It's like watching, I think this is, while it's a very exciting technology, very revolutionary in a lot of ways, it's still just the same pattern I've seen and you've seen a lot, which is just like a new technology comes out. It's really, really important. People latch on. All these same things exist in its ecosystem as have existed in other new technologies ecosystems. We we play the catch up dance, right? We're always behind. The developers are always. We didn't come up with MCP, right? Um, Developers did, and so we're just following along, trying to help harden along the way. I don't
Yeah.
know. Just seeing this it's just seen these cycles too much.
Yep. I mean, and this is part of why I like this article, right? Like, was he's definitely seeing the same things, right? Like this in this chaos, and I've got it highlighted on the screen, right? In this chaos, mistakes happen. Like principles of least privilege are going to be violated. Whether or not the tools exist to actually limit, that sort of access, that sort of tooling, whatever it is, it's going to happen. As these machines talk to each other, there's going to be bad setups. There's going to be bad configurations. There's going to be, there's no, we don't even really have the idea of a firewall rule or this ability to limit that within MCP currently outside of the tool is available or it's not type thing, right? Like you either have access to all of this through the MCP server or you don't. And realistically, it's because, hey, we stood it up and we told the AI where it was. But we don't necessarily, again, are we limiting that based on just normal access control, firewall rules? What is it that's actually there? We're not going all the way up to what functions it should have access to, where it's actually coming through, what's the identity of that server in and of itself. So I'm with you. Like the mistakes are going to be there. It feels like what's old is new again, right? When it comes to, hey, we've got a new protocol that's coming out, we've got new functionality that's available to us and new technology. Have we learned, right? Have we learned? That's really what it comes down to. Do we know how to secure things, and how quickly are we going to be able to turn that around? I mean, obviously, the big
Yeah.
companies like Google have an incentive for that to actually release some of this because they do want those tools to be out there. They want developers to use it, to be embedded in their ecosystem. They want people to be using, Gemini and these other AI tools to do more things, and to maintain their like level of dominance in the market, which is wholly appropriate. But on the flip side, that also means that mistakes are going to be made, stuff's going to be rushed out the door, and there are going to be security exploits associated with it. There's going to be breaches. There's going to be other things that happen, especially, we've seen it before. Cloud was the most recent, but now it's AI, and we'll see how it goes. But don't be shocked when we talk about breaches that come about because of this.
Well, that's what I was thinking about. I mean, that's the last like 2 minutes that you were talking, and the more I was sitting there thinking, man, like if I'm on an already taxed AppSec team and I got this backlog of bugs that have not been taken care of, and I've got new things being released that we need to secure, and we've got, I don't know, who knows what kind of things we need to respond to on the fire drill side of things. And so you got all that going on, and now you've got this new technology coming in. Whether it makes sense for the business, or whether it's just some executives' desire to become AI or whatever centric. But yeah, now they're sitting here in a situation where it's like, all right, so like this, first of all, you would have to spend a decent amount of time, I feel like, anyways, investing yourself into learning how these tools work. Then on top of that, you need to basically build a threat model around the use case, which I can tell you that it would be tough to do, because there's going to be so much experimentation internally at a company like that, right? Just to figure out
Mhm.
how to make it work the way you need to make it work. So then let's say it gets to a stable point. Well, now this person or this person's team is responsible for figuring out how to harden all along the way, which is obviously going to come after the fact, as it usually does. I just think that's like a really tough ask, and I can see. And I guess my point is that I'm thinking about this from the perspective of that person, and that's got to be pretty tough. It's probably pretty freaking annoying to hear, uh, anything even related to AI at that point. You're probably like, hey, I don't want to. I'm so sick of hearing about this, and I would get that, rightfully so, right? Um,
Yeah.
and actually,
Well,
I'm saying that because I'm thinking about somebody in particular that we
yeah.
both know, who I'm trying to get on the podcast to talk about this. But like, he's dealing with an interest. I'll just say this situation, one of the many interesting situations, as somebody who's responsible for securing a company who now wants to integrate with these tools. There is there's a flip side to that too. Not just that, but also when other companies use those tools. So in this example, this person had a company use an AI offensive product. I won't say the name of it, but if you're listening and you're in this community, you've definitely heard of it. Anyway, somebody used it as like a third party vendor assessment. You know how, like, if you're like the customer of a company, oftentimes you do some periodic pen test against that company to see if they're doing like their due diligence with security, right? Well, imagine instead of you doing that with your team, instead you pay, or you pay some product to run AI agents that autonomously attempt to find vulnerabilities against that platform. And now there becomes a bunch of questions. So first of all, um, when that wasn't explicitly agreed upon, is that okay legally, right? Like, meaning, we gave you the ability to do vendor assessments, but we never said that you could use some product, which we now have questions about, right? So that's the second problem, which is like, yeah, how are those results being used? Are they being used to train the model? That's always a question everybody always has. How are you using my data? um, who all along the way now has access to any vulnerabilities you find? Were you giving
Mhm.
credentialed access? Like, was this product and platform giving credential access? Because now we're talking about a non-human identity, right? Just like the whole, bringing
Yeah.
this full circle, right? Now we're talking about that, where it's like, okay, well, this isn't a human being. This is just some tool, but then you've given it credentials, and I don't know how well it's secured to use those credentials, and how are those credentials handled. And again, not you doing it, it's some third, like fourth party almost, right? So, or third party. But anyways, it's just a weird situation, and there come with that comes so many open questions. And there are other scenarios, again, not in the vein of my company is now using AI, but things like this, where it's more like other companies using AI, and there becomes some weird legal and regulatory and security questions that come along the way. Very long-winded way of kind of wrapping that out, but I guess I'm just agreeing with you. Like, man, it's tough. It's tough to be a practitioner with all that going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is like, from a business pressure perspective, I get what, it feels like the companies that respond well are taking a very pragmatic and mature approach to use of LLMs within their organization, but against their platforms as well. Like, you're probably not going to see MCP access into like your bank account anytime soon, right? Like, the financial markets, the financial companies aren't necessarily going to expose that data via that sort of access. Doesn't mean that you couldn't build something on top of an API that already existed and create your own tool, but they're not going to implement that. And you would have to use your own credentials to actually, get in and actually create that infrastructure. And it's mainly just because it is so chaotic. And we're in early days. That's definitely it. And Ben does dig through this, like getting a handle on NHIs that are floating around in your organization, knowing what they're actually doing. Part of this is just a maturity play, to your point, Ken, as well. Right? Like it's hard to be in that space if you're not mature, because you don't have a good response to any of this. And this kind of goes back to where you want to actually fit as an AppSec practitioner and what you want to focus your time on. Right? You step into an organization that doesn't have an application security team, and this is the sort of thing that's going to keep me up at night. Right? If it were me, just because we don't necessarily know what the developers are doing. We're a startup where they're experimenting with this data that we have that is sensitive and should be classified. On the one hand, I'm trying to pass SOC 2. On the other hand, I'm trying to secure all this data, making sure that we don't end up in breaches in places. And yeah, it becomes this huge headache if there isn't a certain level of maturity for any given organization to actually deal with new technologies as they come out, but also to secure their environment. And if they haven't thought about it, we are constantly playing catch up. And that is definitely what I see with companies as I walk in there. Not even from an AI perspective, just AppSec in general. They're the companies that do this well, that have some forethought. There's some that are overzealous in how much security they actually put into place. But it's a wide spectrum. And then there's the companies that don't really have anything and basically are YOLOing their way through life. And yeah, we know what happens on the YOLO side of things, eventually to some companies. Some it's fine, but others, when they get targeted, it's game over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway. So yeah, interesting discussion, interesting stuff that's coming out, interesting plays in the market. We've spent quite a bit of time on MCP today. But is there anything else that you want to call out? I know we're at top of the hour here.
I'm trying to think of what else to call out. I mean, I'm flying to RSA next week. Well, I say RSA B-Sides. I'm flying to B-Sides next Friday. And then B-Sides is obviously Saturday, Sunday. You and I've got the panel going on there. I'm going to put the link in. Just a reminder again, May 12th through 13th, we've got our training that we're giving on practical secure code review with AI enhancements. So you get to learn a little bit of AI, and you also get to learn about how to do a manual secure code review. Anyway, so that's there. So yeah, I'll be flying out there next Friday. I'll be there for almost a week, not quite, leaving out on Thursday. But got that Aegis event that you talked about, that we've got way more registrations than we've got available seats. So we're having to be, well, apologies if we can't get you in. We have to be a little selective. Again, limited seats there. We got our panel at B-Sides, you and I, that you mentioned. I'm going to be doing a workshop, which is a little weird. So this is I didn't realize how the workshops work until recently at RSA and DEF CON for the AppSec Village. So it's 2 hours that you get for a slot, but it's actually just like an 8-minute pod activity on repeat, which I for some reason I was thinking it was a workshop, like you sit down for a couple hours and we teach you a skill. But no, it's just an 8-minute pod activity. This is because I guess people just kind of navigate through it. This is going to be my first time ever doing it, being giving a workshop there. So I'm actually really excited to see how it goes, and I want to share, if I can share any video or if I can share anything from those. I want to do that with the audience, in case you've never been to those villages and don't know what it's like. But anyways, that just I thought that was interesting, that it's essentially I'm doing the same activity over and over again for 6 hours, because we've got three spots for that workshop, so 6 hours total, 8 minutes on repeat. So I figured by the fifth 6 hour, man, I'm going to be really I'm really gonna understand how to pitch it or how to work it.
How to work it to have people actually
Yeah,
interact with it. Yeah.
yeah,
Part of that makes
exactly.
sense, right? Like you want interaction, but I guess from an AppSec Village perspective, they want people coming in doing something, and then they're popping to other activities, or I guess, right? Like that. That's my understanding, at least. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for it. It yeah, it should be good. But yeah, so this is just gonna basically be a week of my life. But I'm trying to think of what else. Product life is going good. Building stuff is going well. Yeah, just this week taking, as you know, PTO. So that's why I'm a little brain dead today. I slept in. Not used to sleeping in. That was nice. Feel good.
yeah.
Uh,
That sounds like a good thing, right? Like wouldn't necessarily mind that, right? Um, yeah.
yeah.
Well, good. Otherwise, like if you haven't, as you can see, I'm repping like our Absolute AppSec hoodie here, right? Like we do have the merch store. If you would like any Absolute AppSec gear, we do push some stuff up there, or swag. We do bring that to events as well. I'm sure we need to see, right? Like we'll definitely have socks at the event for Absolute AppSec socks. I've still got a bunch of those, maybe a couple of shirts. It's about time for us to do some restocking for shirts for us to give away. But you can always support the podcast by going to merch.absoluteappsec.com. And remember that there is a newsletter that's available for Absolute AppSec. We summarize the week's episode this week on Absolute AppSec, or this week on Absolute AppSec. We summarize the episode plus some articles and things that are interesting to us that don't necessarily make it onto the podcast on a weekly basis. Those get included in that newsletter as well. So, cool. All right. Well, we will take the conversation online. Thanks to everyone today for listening. Please find us on Slack if you have any further comments or questions about MCP or anything else that we've talked about. But otherwise, I think that'll be it for today. Thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you.